The year is 2020. The pandemic just hit not only Germany but the entire world. And I found myself in a situation where everything seemed to be very unpredictable and on hold. At the same time, I had some money saved up for upcoming travels. And little did I know, I was about to spend all of this money on my very first film camera, the Leica M6. To be very specific with you, the M6 was not the first Leica that I bought myself. I started getting into the system way back in 2018 when I first picked up my beloved Leica Q1. So way back in 2018 I bought the Leica Q on eBay, and ever since I started using the Leica Q, which by the way is this little guy over here. When I first bought the Leica Q, I started getting into the Leica system, and I knew there was something special about it. I'm not talking megapixels, lenses, colors, whatever. There is something about using a Leica camera, and if I had to put it into words, I would say it's the feeling when you pick up the camera and you go for a shoot. You have that kind of confidence and belief in yourself that you end up with some great photographs. This might be influenced, of course, by all the great photographers that use Leica cameras nowadays. But back then it was a camera that I loved using because it was so simple and just beautiful looking. And I just had the feeling of, I'm gonna make some great images today. This is something that you don't, consider when you buy a camera. You just focus on the technical stuff. But I felt like this camera was truly special, and it really elevated my not only street but also portrait photography back in the days. And I'm sure everyone that has ever owned a Leica camera knows the feeling that I'm talking about. Yes, I said owning a camera, because if you just use it once and, get it from a friend and use it for one shoot, I think you don't really understand the feeling of what it is to shoot with a Leica camera. It has more to do with your own personal connection with your camera. And I really believe that you have to own a Leica camera, especially the M system, because the rangefinder and everything that comes with it is so special that you really have to understand and own the camera for quite some time in order to really understand how the camera works, and also to understand that feeling that I just talked about. So fast forward to 2020, where I bought my very first film camera, the Leica M6, which is this little beauty over here. I spent about 2,000 euros back then, which is a pretty decent price. Of course, just the body, not with the lens. And I also bought my very first roll of film back then, which was Portra 400. And Portra 400 35mm at the time was 9 euros. I think today, 2024, it's at least 15 euros or even more. So good old times, always remember. And I know some people who started with film photography way earlier who paid way less than 9 euros, but for me, looking back at the price is like ridiculous if you think about the prices today. Little did I know that when I picked up the M6 for the first time, I had the feeling of being a complete newbie when it comes to photography at all. I mean, using an M system with a rangefinder and using film for the very first time, there was so many things that I didn't know about. And that feeling was very frustrating in the beginning, but also very exciting, to be honest. So from this point, starting to using the M6, there was something that changed for me. Because as I said, there were so many things that were new for me using that camera and that medium of film photography that I ultimately came to the point where I learned so much new stuff about photography. I knew that my results weren't the best in the beginning, but that's also part of the process, and everyone that started shooting film at some point will refer to this, because if you switch the medium completely and even the system, there's no chance that you get great results right away, and everyone's telling you that you can. I'm sure there is a process involved that you have to go through, and I also believe this is a healthy way to get familiar with the camera and to get familiar with the medium of film, because it's such a beautiful thing to experience. And I think there is no shortcut, and no, shooting film for almost 4 years taught me that you just have to embrace the process, and there's something very beautiful. Everything about the M6 was so slow compared to shooting digital. I mean, not only the medium itself that you had to load a roll of film into the camera, but more the camera itself being completely mechanical. It doesn't even have an on and off switch. You just put in the film and you're good to go. Something that was so different for me. And it, of course, has the rangefinder, which means that you don't see through the lens, but besides the lens through a tiny window, and the manual focus on top. That was something that was so fun to experience, but also very hard to begin with. I felt like I had to relearn photography from scratch, and I loved it. Ever since spring 2020, I shot everything with the M6, all my street photographs and also my private shootings that I did with friends and fellow models. So as time went by, in 2022 I felt like I was missing out on some opportunities when it comes to shooting film. And since the M6 is entirely mechanical, I felt like I needed some form of automation in my camera. So I upgraded for the Leica M7 in autumn 2022. So that's the M7, looks quite similar to the M6. I think essentially it has the MP body instead of the M6 body, but you don't really notice that much of a difference. But the main difference is that it has a shutter automation. So I don't know if you guys can see it, but there it says auto on the shutter speed, and this essentially enables you to just put it on auto and the camera will pick the shutter speed by itself. And by having this ability to just put the shutter on auto, I invited some sort of randomness into my photography, because when you shoot the M6, you have everything under control. You're very slow in shooting because you have to dial in the shutter speed and the aperture every single time. And putting something on auto and don't have to think about it all the time really freed me up in my style of shooting, I felt. I took the M7 to a bunch of places since autumn 2022. I brought it to Iceland, I brought it to New York, I brought it to LA, to Italy, to so many different places. And I loved shooting with the M7. A lot of you guys asked me, but when you love the camera so much, why did you even stop shooting the M6 and the M7? If you've been watching my videos on the channel closely, you might have noticed that at some point I ditched the M6 and the M7 and replaced it with a completely different camera, which by the way is also a Leica camera, but there's so many other cameras and brands that build that kind of same cameras. And this is the Leica Z2X. 2X I believe stands for 2 times zoom or something. So this is a point and shoot film camera by Leica, which can, you know, has this zoom. Hope you guys can see it. And the lens goes from 35 to 70 millimeters, f4 till 7.6 or something, so not that open in terms of aperture. But as you see, this camera is very different from the M6 and the M7, even though it's the same brand. I don't want to touch on the gear stuff too much in terms of what the camera can actually do, because it can't really do that much. It's just a complete automatic camera. So you just throw in the film, you put it on, and you're good to go. So it's vastly different from using a completely mechanical camera. Not even in terms of usability, but also in terms of price. I think I paid about 300 euros, maybe 250 for the Z2X, which is, you know, compared to 2,000 euros for the M6, 3,200 euros for the M7, just a tiny little bit of money. And remember, that was just the body of the cameras. I didn't even add lenses at the time when I started shooting with the M6, by the way. So coming back to the question, why did I stop shooting the M6 and the M7? Why did I ditch those cameras and replaced it with the Z2X? Well, the answer is I've changed. And what I mean by that is my photographic approach changed. My creative approach changed. As we all grow with new experiences, new friendships, new places that we travel, new thoughts that come to mind, you will ultimately end up at a point where you feel like, maybe I should switch something. Maybe I don't like the stuff that I did till today. Maybe there's something new for me to explore. And this is what happened exactly when I picked up a point and shoot camera, which is so vastly different from the M6 and the M7. I felt like there is so much new to explore for me using this sort of camera, and maybe it's time for a change. And for me, this change meant ditching the mechanical cameras, going to a fully automatic camera, and to really enjoy the capabilities of the camera and the capabilities of me as a photographer. Because I know what you guys think in the first place, why would you stop using such an expensive and great camera and replace it with a way cheaper one, which maybe is not even that fun shooting? All I can say is that I really love the camera. I love the Z2X for it being so simple and automatic. But as I said, this comes from my own photographic approach and my own photographic vision that has changed over time. And I felt like that the M6 and the M7, they don't really fit my needs anymore. All I can say is it was so refreshing to switch to a completely automatic camera and give away so much control to the camera itself and to some unknown circumstances, if that makes sense. And I loved it. I loved just giving away some control. And what I've learned from this is not only to give away some control to other things, but also to believe in myself as a photographer, believe in myself to be able to create some great images despite the camera not being so expensive or fancy, whatever. Despite every circumstances, I just started relying on myself and what's in here. And it was so freeing. And I loved every single step of freeing myself up from all the gear that I collected from back in the days. And the biggest lesson that I've learned from this is to let go. Don't get me wrong, I still love the M system. It's a very unique experience of taking photographs. And I might see myself in the future doing it again. But as for now, as my photographic needs are so different and the M system doesn't really fit my needs anymore, I learned to let go of the past. And by this I also mean letting go of all the cameras. Letting go of all the expensive cameras that I collected back in the days. I really felt the urge to invite more freedom and more ease into my photography. And since I picked up the Z2X, I felt like I'm so much more detached from my photographs, but also more into the, like, more focused in the moment. I'm just way more fluent in how I shoot. I'm able to see things much more clear. And what I mean by saying I'm more detached, I mean it in a good way. I mean it in a, I don't expect too much from the photograph way. I mean it in a, I focus more on my creative approach way, if that makes sense. I'm just way more at ease when I shoot with such a tiny little camera, and I don't expect the results to be that good, but that frees you up for new ideas on set, new ideas when you shoot with a model or a friend and take some portraits. It's so freeing, and I can recommend it to anyone. If you feel stuck creatively, one thing, of course, in photography is to switch systems, to switch the gear. But it doesn't always need to be to, you know, invest in a newer and bigger and whatever camera. Sometimes it's just good to let all the gear sit in your bookshelf for a second and get a cheap camera at your local camera store. And this is what ultimately led me to this very point, where I'm not using the M6 for over 2 years, and even the M7 for over a year now. But now it's summer 2024, and the M6 and the M7, they're just sitting in my bookshelf and they collect dust. And as I talked about letting things go and freeing yourself up for new opportunities, I decided to let go of all the stuff that I don't need anymore. I know it's not very common to sell such an expensive and even rare camera, because you could, you know, just sit it in your bookshelf, because it doesn't really decrease in value over time. But I know the feeling of getting into a new system, which for me was the M system back then. And I know the feeling of the excitement that comes with it. And therefore, I want to give those cameras to someone out there who is probably so excited to use any of those cameras as I was back in the days. So I decided to let go of all the unnecessary gear that I collected over the past years. And this includes the M6, this includes the M7, this includes my Konica Hexar, which is coming close to the M7. So much gear that is just, you know, sitting somewhere in my apartment, and it's also sitting somewhere here. It's the, you know, the little thought that tells you like, oh, you can use that camera also. But it's not really, you're not really benefiting from that thought. It's more like it's holding you back at some point. So I came to the conclusion to get rid of all of the gear that I don't use anymore. I rather give the cameras to someone else so they can learn from it. There is one camera that I also want to show you in this video, which is a very old SLR from Canon. It's the Canon EOS 3. And this camera is operated with any Canon lens that you can use out there. This lens is a 2405 f4. You can use it with a 2470 2.8. You can use it with a 35 1.4 if you want. It's just a very old professional camera from Canon, from back in the days, from the early 2000s, I believe. And I bought this camera for my portrait shoots, especially because I shoot a lot of lifestyle and portrait stuff for clients. And this comes very, very close to what I shoot on my Sony a7 IV in digital. And the workflow with this one is just so effortless. And as I said, it comes very close to the Sony in terms of workflow. And this just fits my needs for portrait photography so much better than the M system, and also the point and shoot. So this is why I picked up the Canon. But as I said before, I used the Z2X for all of my street photography, all of my travels. It just fits in my pocket, even in my back pocket of my pants, and I just bring it everywhere. And I love the camera for being so tiny yet so versatile and reliable. So if you're interested in picking up the M7, I still sell it. There's a link down in the description if you consider checking it out. The M6, by the way, is already sold. The M6 that I just showed you is from my friend Felix, because I sold my M6 like half a year ago already. I hope this answers some of your questions, because you guys have been asking me for quite some time, why did you stop shooting the M6 and the M7? How is it shooting a point and shoot? And yeah, I hope this clears up some thoughts. I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you found this helpful in any way, and I can just say that I want to encourage you guys to seek out new creative ways to stop using and falling into old habits and old, you know, creative thoughts, but rather to embrace the new and to not be afraid to let something go that once was so desirable for you or even so expensive for you. There is something beautiful in letting things go and making space for new stuff, not only on a gear side, but also on a creative side. And I hope this became a little more clear in watching this video. So thank you for tuning in today. Make sure to subscribe to the channel. I see you in the next one. Take care.